Okay, we left off here. So proteins, because they're so long, they get very unstable. If it's just one long continuous chain of amino acids. So what it does, it starts to do some secondary folding and tertiary folding, and it's for stability reasons. And this is all done through intermolecular forces. So intermolecular forces is extremely important with proteins because it determines the shape of the protein. If the protein happens to be an enzyme, it's even more critical because the active site on the protein where the enzyme works changes shape based on intermolecular forces. Also, pH and temperature, just like you studied with your enzymes lab last week. So that was good timing on that lab. Okay, so the primary protein structure is just a long string of amino acids. And again, depending on how long it is, the secondary folding and tertiary folding will come into play. The longer it is, the more that'll affect the shape or conformation of the protein. These are all peptide bonds or amide bonds. Now, the intermolecular forces are going to come from two main areas. What the side chains are, and also the carbonyl group and the amino group. Those are the main two areas, okay? So the side chains, and the side chains, remember, are broken up into four groups, two neutrals, polar and nonpolar, basic and acidic. Okay, there are two kinds of secondary foldings. One is called a helix, and the other one is called pleated sheets. Now, with a protein, it has every intermolecular force working. It has hydrogen bonding. It's got dipole and London dispersion forces. And I want to add to that ionic. Ionic is questionable as being an intermolecular force. Some books have it, some books don't. I like to include it because it's not an actual covalent sharing bond. It's just an attraction, which is what intermolecular force is all about, attraction. So I like to include it. So these are the main IMFs that are going on with a protein. In other words, everything. Everything. That's why proteins are soluble in water, except one exception. Who knows what that is? When are proteins not soluble in water? Think about cheese. Why does cheese form? Remember the isoelectric point? When the isoelectric point pH-wise is reached, the protein is not soluble in water anymore. Because all these intermolecular forces are nullified at the isoelectric point. Hence, the protein becomes very nonpolar and comes out of solution. Other than that, it's soluble in water. Okay, so this is what the alpha helix looks like. It looks a lot like DNA. And DNA is in a helix for the same reason long proteins are, stability reasons, in a polar solvent like water. Pleated sheets are kind of goofy looking. They're basically long strings that are in parallel. And I don't know why it's called beta and alpha. And I've never heard of a beta helix. The only thing I've ever heard of is alpha helix. And on the pleated sheet, it's always referred to as beta. Other than the alpha is more common than the pleated sheet is the only reason I can think of why they're called alpha beta. So when a molecule goes into secondary organization or structure and the folding starts, usually it's a mixture of the helix and pleated sheet. It's not one or the other. It's usually the mixture. Now, this is an important slide. What determines all of this are the interactions of the side chains. Now, there are strong side chains and there are weak ones. I mentioned before, cysteine has got an SH bond, thiol bond. When it bonds with another cysteine, you form a SS bond. That SS bond is covalent, very strong, very strong. Then there's the ionic attraction. There is hydrogen bonding, and then there is just LDF. Those are all forces that are attracting those side chains together. And all of them except the SS bond is affected by temperature and it's affected by pH. That's why our body goes to great lengths to maintain pH of our blood, goes to great lengths to maintain the temperature of our body as well for cross-link reasons. Now, if we change the solvent, we change the shape of the protein. So when proteins go from a polar solvent like water into something nonpolar, like say pentane, that shape totally changes, totally. Because then the interaction of the side chains act differently. And they act differently, then the shape changes to maintain stability. So in this case, the protein is going to have the polar groups pointing towards the polar solvent, and the nonpolar groups being protected by the polar groups. Kind of like a wagon train in the Old West when they were being attacked. They always got in a circle. That's the most defensive position to be in for a wagon train, being attacked by robbers or whatever. Now, if we change the solvent, like we throw in pentane, this thing would turn inside out. So the non-polar side chains would be facing the non-polar solvent. And lastly, the quaternary level of structure is the most complex. That's where you have multiple proteins coming together into one unit. Sometimes they have. Why do motorcycles have to be so loud? There's a guy at my apartment complex that has the loudest motorcycle. It's a custom one. Looks like it was made out of, oh, I forgot that series where they customize motorcycles. It looks just like one of those. Probably costs $70,000. And it's straight pipe. There's no muffler on that thing and all. And it is, you can hear it coming into the apartment complex. It's so loud. Okay. This quaternary structure is very common in our bodies. For example, hemoglobin. There's a ton of hemoglobin in our body, and it's an example of a quaternary organization. Now, amide bonds can be broken. Peptide bonds can be broken. Something called hydrolysis. We've gone through this with a lot of carbohydrates, for example. And this is a process by which proteins are digested in our stomach by the enzyme protease. What happens? It breaks down the protein to smaller and smaller peptides where it gets down to just plain amino acids. Proteases need a very low pH. That's the only place. I was just talking about this in my class up at Sierra. We were talking about acids and bases over the weekend. The protease needs a hydrochloric acid environment, number one. Number two, that environment needs to be at a pH of around 2, very, very acidic. And it's the only place in our body where we have a strong acid. All the acids in our body are very weak, very, very weak. By the way, this thing does about 90% of its work in our stomachs. And then when the stomach purges the food into the small intestine, some of it still happens in the small intestine, even though the pH has gone up in the small intestine to 7-ish, it still works a little bit to finish off the digestion. Okay, again, when you change the shape or the conformation of the protein, particularly if it's an enzyme, bad things happen. The enzyme activity goes way down, doesn't work anymore. Just like in our lab, we changed temperature and the activity of the lactase went down. Temperature changes, the activity went down as well. So the shape of proteins is very, very sensitive to those two factors. Solvents also come into play, but we don't usually change solvents in our body. It's always water-based. But you change solvents, it will change the protein shape. So these are the deals that will affect proteins. Now, and we need to add pH to this also. So heat is kinetic energy of the molecules moving. When you change heat, the molecules will either slow down if you cool it or speed up if you heat it. And that will break up the protein. That's called cooking. So when you cook, you raise the temperature so the protein changes shape, and that's what meat is cooked. Who's heard of ceviche? Anyone? Hey, have you ever made it? No. Okay, basically in ceviche, the meat is cooked with acid, citrus fruit, lime or lemon or orange. And the meat is actually cooked. I was just reading about this yesterday. I'm going to do this for my dinner group in a few weeks. So what you do instead of heat on ceviche, it's acid that cooks the meat. You put in raw fish, raw shrimp, and then you leave it in there for a couple hours and it'll actually change everything about the protein. Totally safe to eat, assuming the meat was sanitary when you start. That's ceviche. It's a very Latin-based process. So, Cinco de Mayo, ceviche. Okay, now heat is basically, again, the kinetic energy of the molecule. So that's how a microwave works. Microwaves will speed up the movement of the molecules inside your microwave oven. So that's how cooking occurs with a microwave. You're speeding up those molecules. Um, Organic solvents. We talked about that. Most of the time, there are not organic solvents involved. If you want to um, um, preserve protein, you can use this organic solvent like formaldehyde. Now, because formaldehyde changes the protein, if it's an enzyme, it will no longer work. Strong acids and bases. How do you think our stomach works? It's a strong acid. Why isn't the acid eat up our, yeah. Yeah, your stomach has barriers for that acid to attack your stomach. Now, when that barrier breaks down, you get an ulcer. And that's when the acid works on the actual tissue of the stomach. So it's important to maintain that mucus membrane. Detergents and soaps, they change the surface tension. Surface tension will then modify the shape of the protein. Now, heavy metals mess up proteins as well. And what they do is they interfere with the cysteine amino acid, the thiol. It binds permanently to the thiol. Then that thiol cannot undergo any other reactions, like doing a crosslink. So what happens is the shape of the protein changes. If it's an enzyme, it stops working. So all these are important to know. Because it changes the shape of the protein. Okay, that's the last slide for proteins. Yeah, I keep talking about enzymes. All right, so I want to talk about enzymes now. Okay, there's two ways to name an enzyme, like most organic or biochemical molecules. Common name and IUPAC. The common name are things like protease or pepsin. Those are all names of enzymes, not the IUPAC name. The IUPAC name has two parts. It has the substrate and it has what the enzyme is doing. Now, this is out of your textbook for those of you who have purchased the textbook. If not, you have it right here. Okay, so let's talk about the IUPAC name. These are the classes, the main classes. And then there are subclasses below that. Now, kinase is a very popular enzyme class. Kinases put phosphate groups on molecules. For example, adenosine triphosphate, the energy molecule. To go from ADP to ATP, a kinase is required to put that extra phosphate group on the ADP. So kinases are all over the place. So say we want to take that glucose and put a phosphate group on it. Now that's the first step of glycolysis, is this one right here. We take glucose and phosphorylate it. And it goes on carbon number 6. So the substrate is glucose. The process is kinase. And that's a really good example. Very simple. You already know what glucose is. And this is the first process of glycolysis. It also happens to be, it gets phosphorylated a second time as well. And then it separates into 2 3-carbon units. Okay. Oxidases. Oxidases and reductases. Oxidases oxidize something, reductases reduces some things. For example, there's a path taking a fatty acid through to produce prostaglandins. And that's a process that non-steroidal anti-inflammatory drugs do, NSAIDs. And it goes through an oxidase, 2 of them. Oxidase 1, oxidase 2. It's called COX-1 and COX-2. Transferases. That's where something is moved one molecule to the other. Like in the case of a kinase, where we're moving a phosphate group to another molecule. Hydrolases. Those hydrolyze molecules, whether it's a long carbohydrate or a long protein. Like protease is an example. There's nucleases, proteases, lipases. Isomerase makes an isomer of something. For example, in glycolysis again, we bring fructose in, step 3, bring fructose in, and it's isomerized to glucose with an isomerase, fructose isomerase enzyme. Liases are kind of not very ubiquitous like the other ones, but they create double bonds when you have an alcohol, for example. And then the one on the bottom is ligase. And that's used during ATP hydrolysis. In other words, going from ATP to ADP. So we use a kinase to go from ADP to ATP. When we go from ATP back to ADP, we use the ligase. Okay. And these are some examples. What I want to do is I had another enzyme set of slides. I don't know where it went. Um, I have lost a presentation. Okay, I got worried there. Okay, so let's look at an enzyme reaction now. Normally, when we have a chemical reaction, we have reactants. Those break apart or recombine to form products. Okay, with enzymes, we don't call them reactants, we call them substrates and products. Now, I don't know if you covered this in your 305. This complex is called an activated complex. The activated complex is when you break apart, in this case, the substrate into pieces, it's going to be all jumbled together. And that's called the activated complex or the enzyme substrate complex in enzyme terms. Now, when we look at where did it go? When we look at and we looked at a reaction, and this is potential energy versus time. Did you learn about Gibbs free energy in your 305 class? Never heard of it. Okay. Things go from unstable to stable in reactions. Okay. So we're starting with a reactant or a substrate in case of an enzymatic reaction. Okay. It requires energy to take apart the reactants or substrates. It takes energy. That's why reactions don't just happen. Requires energy. Now, sometimes all it needs is room temperature energy, and it happens. Sometimes you have to heat it, but you need to get over this hump here. The hump is this is unstable up here. That's why it requires energy to get there. Now, once it's up here, two things can happen. It wants to become more stable, so you can go back to the reactant side or the product side. Now, there's a ratio all the time of how much goes back and how much goes to the product. It's called an equilibrium constant. All reactions have an equilibrium constant, no exceptions. Now, what a catalyzed reaction does, it lowers the energy requirements for that reaction to happen. Hence, the reaction speeds up because there's less energy required to get it going. And an organic catalyst is called an enzyme. So, when you go from a substrate to a product, it usually gives off heat because it's more stable. So that energy, that potential energy is converted to kinetic energy. Kinetic energy is the energy of motion. So it speeds up the vibration of those molecules. Hence the heat goes up. Now there are two factors. Kinetic factor is how fast it happens. The thermodynamic factor is whether it's favored or not. Let me give you an example. Diamonds. How are diamonds made?
They compress carbon.
Okay, so basically you take a piece of charcoal under a lot of pressure and time, create a diamond. That's how industrial diamonds are made. Which do you think is more stable? The diamond or the charcoal?
Probably charcoal.
So your ring, nice big diamond on it, is converting to charcoal because it's more stable. Now, kinetic, thermodynamic. The thermodynamic consideration on that reaction is the charcoal is favored. Kinetically, the reaction is extremely slow because it has a really high activation energy requirement. It's very, very slow. But most people don't know that the charcoal from which a diamond is made is more stable, except for, have you heard that before? Oh, really?
Just a good guess.
Well, it's one or the other, right? That's why it's the charcoal. It's because it's more stable. Has an entropy factor in it that makes it more stable. It's more random than the diamond. Diamond is very organized and ordered. Okay. So a catalyst lowers the activation energy. Hence, kinetically, things speed up. You end up with the same products. That doesn't change. The reaction doesn't change. It's just kinetics change. Speed of the reaction changes only. Now, I mentioned heat. Enzymatic reactions produce very little heat. Very little heat. Because your body doesn't like to have heat going on. Got to maintain our 98.6 Fahrenheit body temperature. Now, enzymes have specificity. That has to do with the active site. What kind of molecule can fit in that active site? Some are extremely specific and others are more general. For example, amylase is an enzyme that digests carbohydrates. Sucrase, also a carbohydrate enzyme, only works on sucrose. So you have amylase works on sucrose. Sucrase works on sucrose also. They both do the same thing. They hydrolyze the sugars into its monosaccharides. So that's what they're talking about here on the absolute specificity and relative specificity. Now, enzymes can be extremely specific to the point of distinguishing D from L. L carbs are not digested very well because the enzymes amylase and sucrase won't touch them. Only the D versions. And likewise with proteins, all the amino acids are all L versions, and the associated enzymes will only digest L versions. That's a problem with MSG, monosodium glutamate. When you buy it, it comes in two forms, D and L. And some people's enzymatic profile won't touch the that won't touch the D version. Hence, they're very sensitive to it. Other people, like I'm not affected by it at all. I can eat MSG all day, nothing happens. So specificity is one characteristic about enzymes. Some are very broad, some are extremely specific, and everything in between. Now, this is something that's important. Regulation. That's regulation of reactions. For example, if you're tired and you're really hungry and you're tired and everything, your body needs to do something about that. So what it does is some feedback loops that says need more ATP. So the reactions in your body that create ATP are geared up or regulated to be stimulated. If you're full, your body's saying, no more ATP is needed. I've got plenty of it. So there are reactions and regulation that tell your body to slow down on ATP production. That's all part of the regulation. Now, glycolysis, for example, the first step of glycolysis, of energy production, is regulated. The first step of glycolysis is converting glucose to phosphorylated glucose on carbon number 6. That's regulated. Now, interestingly, fructose comes into that reaction complex on the third step. And guess what step is not regulated? Step 3. So when you consume fructose, your body doesn't know when to turn it off. It just, oh, fructose, so I got to make some more ATP here. It doesn't say whether you're needed or not. Where the first step with glucose, it is regulated. So that's one reason fructose is bad for you. It's not regulated. Okay. So there's a lot of things on regulation. There's negative regulation, positive regulation. Sometimes enzymes need what's called a cofactor to work. For example, with hemoglobin, you need iron. No iron doesn't work very well. Those are called cofactors. So if you have an enzyme complex that needs a cofactor and the cofactor is not present, then it's called a apoenzyme. So apoenzymes don't do anything until the cofactor is present. Frequently, the cofactor is a vitamin, for example, could be lots of things. These are some examples of cofactors. Here the vitamins are down here. Anyway, there's a variety of things that can be a cofactor. Okay, I've been talking about active site a lot. That's where the substrate binds to the enzyme that was on the active site. The active site is specific per enzyme. Different enzyme, different active site. Now, there's some other things going on active sites we're going to talk about here in a minute here. But basically, the active site is where all the magic happens on enzymes. Now, for an enzyme to be specific, one of the theories is something called the lock and key theory. In other words, the active site will only allow one molecule, a specific molecule, to enter that active site. The other kind is called an induced fit. And this one, lots of different molecules or substrates can enter. So it's one or the other. Now, this gets more complex as we go on here. Now, when we look at an enzyme reaction, we have something called turnover number. And that's the number of substrate molecules are converted to products. And it's measured in molecules per minute. The unit of enzyme activity produces something called an enzyme international unit. If we look over turnover numbers for various enzymes, they vary tremendously. We're looking at 36 billion here versus 900. Huge spread. Huge spread. That's all kinetics. Some do it faster than others. Okay, so if the enzyme, these are the factors that affect the activity of the enzyme. How much enzyme do you have? Enzyme concentration. How much substrate do you have? And then what's the environment? Which is going to be pH, temperature, and solvent. So enzyme concentration is directly related to product concentration. Substrate concentration, directly related to product concentration. Now, there's some caveats on both of these. The more enzyme we have, faster the rate. Now, it doesn't go on forever. There's something called V sub max. V sub max is when the rate starts to peak out. Can't go any faster. It's just a matter of physics, trying to get the substrate into the active site and it kicks it back out for product. Okay, we already mentioned these. Last week's lab, you looked at temperature and the lactase. Okay, if we graph that, this is what the graph is going to look like. And this can be broader, like this down here, or skinnier. Depends upon a substrate enzyme complex. Also, if the temperature goes up to a point, there's no return. Because what happens is the enzyme is denatured. Protein is denatured in the enzyme, can't return. So denaturation is the changing of the shape of the protein. So some is recoverable, some is not. Same with pH. Change the pH drastically, the enzyme is destroyed shape-wise, and it can't function as an enzyme anymore. And these all affect the enzyme activity. Because this is the key, the active site. Pepsin, which is a protease in your stomach, likes low pH. Other ones, though, can get away with alkaline environments, high pH. Depends on the substrate enzyme complex and the environment for which it's designed to work. Proteases like pepsin are designed to work in an acidic environment. Other ones are not. Inhibitors will decrease the activity of the enzyme. Inhibitors such as pH changes, temperature changes, solvent changes. Irreversible inhibitors will actually change the active site, frequently by bonding with something on the active site. So the active site now is different. So the substrate won't work in that specific active site anymore. That's how poisons work. A lot of poisons, not all of them. Antibiotics work that way as well. Heavy metals, mercury and lead. That's why mercury and lead are poisons. That's how they work. They work on the cysteine amino acid. And it's specifically the thiol part of the amino acid. Cyanide, deadly. What happens on the third part of carbohydrate metabolism? It's called oxidative phosphorylation. And this is the enzyme. Oops. The cytochrome oxidase is an oxidative enzyme because of the oxidase part. That is bound up with the cyanide. So that stops working. So basically, you can't produce ATP. So this is how ATP is formed. In the last, sometimes it's called electron transport. Other times it's called oxidative phosphorylation. It's more accurate to say oxidative phosphorylation than electron transport. Okay, so anyway, these inhibitors, enzyme inhibitors, are sometimes very deadly. This is the oxidative phosphorylation pathway. Is anyone taking CoQ10 supplement? If you're on a statin drug for cholesterol, you should be taking CoQ10 tablets to go along with it. Anyway, that's where it's located. So another interesting thing is this ATP synthase moves as the process proceeds from ADP to ATP. The thing actually moves and turns physically. It's a very unique reaction. Now, some inhibitors are reversible. Some are non-reversible, some are reversible. Now, what happens, there's a lot of ways the reaction can be inhibited. One way is to have the inhibitor bind with the active site non-permanently. So when the inhibitor's in there, the substrate can't fit. So the reaction doesn't happen. When the inhibitor's out of there, substrate can fit in there and the reaction happens. Sometimes there are two active sites on enzymes. One site is for the substrate. Another one is for the inhibitor. But the active site doesn't change, it just doesn't work. And there's another way you can do this as well. It's called allosteric regulation. And there are activators and inhibitors. Same thing though, we have two sites on the enzyme. We have the allosteric modulator site, and this one's depicted like this here. Okay, so this is the shape of the active site. So that substrate, it's got a V here, fits in there nicely. If the allosteric inhibitor is in its site, it will actually change the shape of the active site. So the substrate will no longer fit in there. So that's inhibits. This is allosteric inhibition. You can increase the activity of an enzyme, the opposite of inhibition. Okay, so when the allosteric activator binds to its site, what happens is the active site for the substrate is changed so the substrate can fit in there. So it depends whether you're inhibiting the reaction or increasing the activity of the process. So these are important to know, hence the star. And then there's also enzyme induction. Here, we're actually synthesizing an enzyme when the need is there. So, for example, if you're hungry, okay, what happens is your body will do inductively create an enzyme that will help that process. So here, it isn't being inhibited or isn't being, it's just creating a new enzyme. That's what this is all about, this enzyme induction. So, as far as regulation of the enzyme, there is irreversible ones and reversible ones. We can do this aerosterically, or kind of a more straightforward process where the substrate doesn't fit into the active site anymore. This has two active sites. And site is interesting, it's the way it's spelled. Okay. So that's what I wanted to cover with enzymes. Okay, so there's the IUPAC way of naming them, common way. Two ways. Okay. All right. That's basically unit 4. So what I'm going to start going over now is not today, but on Wednesday. I'm going to start the review process. There's a lot in this unit. Okay, so lab this week, in the next few weeks, actually, two things are going to happen. You have a dry lab you can do in school or you can do at home, optional. It's worth 10 points. And also your projects. Does anyone have their projects with them today? No one's raising their hand. Oh, geez. Cool. So from now to the end of the semester, they're due, okay? I encourage you to do them early. Yeah.
Which dry lab was optional?
Yeah.
The fourth one?
It's extra credit. We need the extra credit. It's on, I'll send you to it. Yeah,
How long should the presentation be?
it's not a presentation. You're gonna come with you're gonna submit your essay online. And you can show me your poster, we're gonna talk. Talk, no presentation. I'm gonna look at your poster and ask you a question and don't prepare this. Just make sure you know the subject. If 305, some of the teachers may need to present the whole class.
Want the essay to be regarding our,
Well,
that,
thousands of words. Yeah, not very. Yeah,
Are we bringing the poster to the lab or lecture? We bring it to the lab, the poster, or lecture?
you can do either one. If you're ready to like that, I'll just put that, or we're gonna watch. Yeah,
On our schedule, it says that May 11th is our last week, is that? That's right.
so. It's something like that.
you said post, like, it was a cardboard, three-sided thing, something like that.
Try to get black. Reason black is everything.
So,
Exactly. Yeah.
thank you, Sebastian, you have a good day.
Take care.
The president, I think a lot of like those courses out there.
You just saying the black and
It helps the upper.
keep that in mind. So people.
Okay, person, thank you. I was texting. Yeah, okay. Oh, I'm texting, we're gonna group chat, and I was like, oh. oops. Alright. So.
Everything goes in, and I have lots of coffee. I should have some dates. Okay. And then, I'll send out an email. And I'll bring them in.
So nice. Where's the paper you want us to get for our final projects there? Is there anything specific you want us to talk about within our topics? I mean,
Well, chemistry, that's what she's asking. But no, be very, very broad.
okay,
If you have something going on, then something you know, that's the issue. You know, that one horsepower, and you say how muscle works, obviously. That's what I think we can.
okay.
So,
Kinds and berries.
that's an understatement, yeah.
Thank you.
Sure.
Hello, I didn't show the lecture last Wednesday. Was there any like important dates or anything given out that day that I might have missed? Okay. And then I'm assuming the lecture was just the first half of the protein lecture. Okay, awesome. I'll see you in my. That's it.
Exams Wednesday, right?
It was something, but it from like last year, yeah, but I need to come. Same like slides, but some slides.
22nd.
Probably just to stop by, just to see what.
It's like a whole thing, right? From
It's
clean
just,
back.
yes.
Right?
Answer this.
Sometimes that would be important.
I don't think.
Okay.
And because that sale almost the same.
Okay.
Oh, you know.
So it's a line.
Okay.
Oh, yeah.
Reporting it, yeah.
That's one.
Yeah, yeah.
I don't think would be actually.
Yeah.
But
Yeah. Yeah.
extra credit. Poster.
No, but they can watch, you know, people do watch. Yeah, you know, it's posted, so, yeah, no, yeah, I get that. Okay, yeah. So.
Yeah. I just follow you.
Good enough.
Right. Well. Yeah, I mean, I complained about like 20 minutes, so.
That's what mine.
Mhm. Mhm.
Well, I should.
Right, because both active, yeah. That's like, yeah. Mhm. Oh,
It just stopped.
that merged, yeah, it's like, yeah, that whole. Yeah.
Especially live and.
Oh, yeah.
Frequently on.
Mhm.
In fact, that's where I heard, I'm in a car one week. And this truck rented $8,500. I mean, it's his fault.
Right, yeah, yeah.
And then park the whole lot.
Oh.
It wasn't as nice as my car.
I remember I had, yeah, it was like my first semester coming here to the campus, and I was coming to like my staff metric class on like Halloween morning. And I had also I got rear-ended on 50s. So, yeah, and then we were stuck with like a rental, an electric car, which I didn't know how to plug it in or anything. For like a week, so I was, yeah. Well. Things happen, I guess.
I mean, it was.
Oh, yeah, yeah.
Because we were. And half an hour. So,
Yeah,
the other guy now stopped track and stuff.
right.
And stop track. You know.
Oh, yeah, okay, yeah,
Sure.
right. Thing, yeah.
It's funny, you never talk about his fault.
Right, right, right.
Well, this guy was saying, oh, I stopped all this. I'm thinking. Doesn't matter. What I would have said.
Right.
You know, we adjust when people have
Mhm.
stuff on this.
Right.
Oh.
Yeah, I know the guy, I was sandwiched, I was between two cars. So I got pushed into the car in front of me. And the guy, like, you know, behind me, he's like, oh, you hit, right? He's like, oh, you hit. And then the lady from the front, who I had hit, because I was pushed, she's like, no, you hit. And then, you know, we all kind of, you know, pushed each other, but
And you're right back.
yeah. Honestly, just the front more. The back was like untouched, but it was an older car, so it was like,
Oh, you know, you look at my car, wasn't too bad.
Mhm.
Drove fine.
Mhm.
But when they took off. Frame was back.
Yeah.
We took pictures of the pickup truck.
Yeah.
Totally. Untouched. It was amazing.
yeah,
My car. Normal.
Right.
Yeah, it was amazing, you know, the bumper had. Hold it. That was it. That's all.
that was it, right, yeah.
And started thinking, wow, events, there's a lot of parts that I did, you know, the trunk was sprung. So, you know,
Oh.
get a new trunk, you know.
Yeah, yeah.
But the fix was wonderful. Fix looked, my car looked better. Wait. I mean. There's no sodium on, aren't you, feelings? We look, I mean, sometimes it's very. Very,
Okay.
that's how orange you get. All cars are orange. They fix.
They know that.
Yeah, that's, then you touch the door.
Right.
So you look at the door, then you look down behind the door, backward down,
Yeah.
and see the orange bill on the door,
Mhm.
the orange bill up down, but yeah, it was. You,
Right, like, yeah. Almost brand new, almost.
yeah, I had, driven it about. I don't know, like 800 miles.
Mhm. Wow.
Yeah. Yeah, it's, my car now, really good shape,
Mhm.
not dangerous. I'm real, if we were at home.
Mhm. Yeah.
When we were parking across, when we were the old one.
Okay.
We had. Parking spaces was narrow,
Mhm.
and I used to have a truck.
Mhm.
At both sides, it was, in parking, what was it in park, very out.
Right, or yeah, it's either you park fine and then other cars just park so close, or, yeah.
So I used to look for a video. And I parked next to the handicap. The door opened up, they had huge space. Next. I didn't hear a car in the lot. Going, parking lot across here,
Mhm.
you can always see it.
Oh, yeah.
But this one way in the back. That's another reason. I didn't. I just look down here.
Oh,
Yeah.
yeah, right.
The wide drive around, like, but there's still some, I start from getting 20 miles per hour. It's pretty good for a big car.
Oh, yeah.
But still, we get 40 miles per hour. Better than.
Yeah, no, yeah.
It was really, like, the whole buildings, cameras all the way around.
Oh,
Yeah. That when I went for pickup truck, wow, all they had was a pick,
okay.
and, they had. Four parking.
Mhm.
Yeah, just any kind you want. And there is to. So I told my wife, why car, come, there. And I'm not using it as a normal.
Right.
Work truck, like carpet in the back, and, so they showed me four trucks. I said, well, you the only one that you should, and I didn't want,
Oh, okay.
it was coming.
Yeah,
What's higher in the other one, so
that's
I
true.
did not want to have.
Yeah.
It usually for truck. And it was a wonderful truck, it's from Canada.
Oh,
So I got a new battery either, and when you put a new battery in, and don't do it correctly, if you do it correctly, you have a second battery in there. When you take the old one out, our system is still charged. If
okay.
you do that, it reverts back,
Okay, yeah, okay.
which is Columbia,
Mhm.
this game in Canada. And the guy goes, oh, this, they had to fix the seal in the back, oh, this is covered under warranty. Then when I cleaned the thing, that's when they changed the battery, oh, they say it's out of warranty now. With a converter, Columbia was shorter than mine.
Right, yeah, yeah.
We went much higher. I said, what's the service department?
Mhm.
I said, it's in Columbia now.
Yeah,
It's not.
right.
I said, when did you meet the Lions? And I don't know. Yeah. That's.
Try to get you there, yeah.
Anyway, how's your project going?
It, honestly, I'm not started. I mean, I sent my proposal and everything, and I have like all my tabs open still of what I use. The obsolete, the lava fruit. And why we should be aware. Of that, well, I read mostly because of. What breakings, or like, crystallization, right, in
That's
the,
all obsolete.
yes.
Obsolete. Yeah, it's, you know, spinach, a lot of obsolete.
I knew,
You
sweet
ever-
potato,
Huh?
sweet potato as well.
I haven't heard about sweet potato. And the reason why, and if you have raw spinach in your salad, something, that's not what it says.
Oh,
And so what I do with spinach is I first I cook it and I get rid of the water. Because the osmosis all in the water.
yeah. Oh, I know about the chocolate.
Yeah. It's a canned spinach. They cook it in a can. So the water that's in the can, dump that, and squeeze out all that. And it's fine.
Okay,
No, it's not awesome.
no? Oh, okay,
Yeah, so I'm looking forward to seeing.
we'll see. Alright. Yeah, I think that's all. Yeah,
So spinach is have a lot of oxide in it.
yeah, that's the last thing I read. That's why it's just stayed, I read a lot about it with like meal prepping, you know, they pair it with like ground beef. And I just heard that, oh, we use a lot of sweet potato.
You know, wait, what? Just having a chance passing the swim. And. Very painful. And at the same time, she's saying, what? And because of any of the stone being has, it covered up pain from the.
Oh, wow. Yeah,
She wasn't technically passing through all under lines. In the hospital. Because it was a 3 Clark, or they could have put a stent in here. But yeah, so. Trying to think, I really like hand spinach, maybe a lot. It's so convenient. I didn't know that about the oxalated spinach, you know. I learned that about a year ago. But another one, if you go camping.
Yeah.
There's something called oxtail.
yes. Yeah,
Yeah,
okay.
oxtail has a ton of oxalates. in it.
Yeah, it's the name,
So
well,
you can use it as a. Program, so.
yeah,
When I used to backpack a lot. And that's what we used to do. And the reason why it's so, it's a ton of folks. Ton. That's what we, it's a brace, kind of like starting. You know, around,
yeah.
yeah. A lot of cool stuff in here, John.
Yeah, no, yeah. We go, you know, I think, you know, with that project. Oh, and other things I'm like, you know, haven't been aware of or, you know, am learning.
That's not. So lots of stuff.
Yeah,
It's, I like it.
Yeah.
And I don't like putting you under stress, I am resentful.
appreciate it, no, yeah. Mhm. Yeah,
Some of the hard. It's a waste of time.
Yeah.
Just relax and just, I'm getting closer, we can talk about it.
conversation, yeah,
Yeah.
right. Yeah, that's nice, for sure. I can't remember what my last industry class would present in. I don't remember.
So some of the, we're fine,
Yeah,
some of the instructors. And also, don't they assign the topic to.
it's more, yeah, it's more like a list of where you can pick from, yeah. Yeah,
You know, in your education, rarely are you gonna be able to do something so that you get. Rarely. And I, something like.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's win-win for me. I'm done.
I said, well,
Huh?
I said, all right, well. I think you're still recording, oh. Oh, I'm not, maybe.
Let me verify.